Welcome back to Skill Stand channel. This video is part of Master PowerShell in a month of lunches. So today in day one session, we'll be discussing on history of PowerShell. Okay, so I think many of you have been hearing about PowerShell for the past 15 to 16 years, but then I'm not sure how many of you know that there has been a lot of versions and enhancements in PowerShell. And when PowerShell was introduced, it was a closed source, meaning it was not allowed for something like open source as on today. So today, we call it as just PowerShell, which is a kind of open source product which can be installed on Windows, Linux, your Docker containers, and then Unix systems, MacBook, and so on. And in the journey, it also had a version called PowerShell Core, which was a kind of cross-compatible product. But let's take a step back and then discuss about PowerShell history. Okay, so when we call it as PowerShell, this particular name is the latest name. Okay, initially when it was introduced, it was called as a Windows PowerShell tool, which was Windows component only, meaning it is part of your Microsoft Windows operating system, and it cannot be um, installed or it cannot be deployed on any other operating system platform. Okay, as you know, PowerShell is primarily a automation tool, more of a task automation tool. If you want to do some kind of patching automation, or if you want to do some kind of monitoring, alerting, or notification, or some scheduled task. So this is more of a automation tool to automate your regular routine scheduled tasks or monotonous work. Okay, and it is also a configuration management tool. So I'm not going to discuss about the complete feature set or the complete core concepts around the PowerShell, but PowerShell is a tool from Microsoft, which is a task automation tool and a configuration management tool primarily. And it is like more or less an enhancement or a advanced version of a command line shell. Okay, so initially in the olden operating systems like Windows 90, 95, 98, and the earlier versions of Windows, it used to just have only the command line tool set. Okay, I'll come to that. And meanwhile, this is not the open source. I mean, this particular latest version of PowerShell, this is an open source product which can be installed on any platform. But then Windows PowerShell is a closed source product, which comes embedded in your Windows Microsoft operating system. Okay, Microsoft Windows OS. So starting with version 3, okay, so they added PowerShell as part of the Windows management framework. So when you go and install the Windows management framework, even the PowerShell version gets upgraded. Okay, so a little bit of introduction. So PowerShell has got introduced in year 2003. Okay, so that is Microsoft, that is the Windows version of PowerShell. So it was initially introduced in 2003, but the actual product got released in 2006. Okay, it was not released in 2003 itself, but prior to that, we had a different naming for PowerShell called Monad. And even prior to that, we used to have a different name like Kermit and so on. So when you think about the operating systems in the 90s and the 2000s, we used to have the command line interpreter as part of your operating system. And you know that, right? So your CLI, the command line tool or the command line interpreter, it comes part of your Windows operating system. So when you talk about Windows operating system, I'm referring to both the MS-DOS generation. We used to have MS-DOS version 1, 2, 3, and even I think MS-DOS version 5. It had something called DOS shell. I'm not sure how many of you have worked with MS-DOS operating systems. And when we moved on to the Microsoft Windows 90, 95, and 98, and so on, we used to have something called command.com. Okay, it is not the command.exe that we have in the current Windows NT and so on. So it is like in the current operating systems, we have something called command.exe, right? That got introduced in Windows NT and Windows CE operating systems. And prior to that, in the Windows 9X family, we used to have something called windows.com. So there is not much difference in the command.com and the command.exe, but there is a small difference. See, when command.exe was introduced, it started supporting scripting languages. It's not a robust scripting language, but basically it supported some basic internal commands, and it also started supporting some level of scripting. So when I say it's a primitive basic scripting language, maybe I'm sure like some of you might have created some batch files, and then you might have tried automating some tasks. But the drawback with the command.exe, it cannot go and automate all facets of Windows GUI. So you cannot do everything in the batch files. Okay, it had its own limitation, and the scripting language was very elementary. Okay, it was not very it did not have all automation capabilities for your GUI related thing. So what Microsoft did in between, I would try to add a line here. So they tried adding something called Windows script host that was introduced in Windows 98 operating system, that tried having some kind of cscript.exe. Okay, so this cscript.exe, it had some active scripting options. Okay, so at that time, some people with the background of Java or VB script, they started writing their own scripts. So it supported JScript, it supported VB script, and we used to execute the script in this particular Windows script host. So when we started using it, it was very popular at that time. But then right, when something gets very popular, its reputation gets spoiled using something called a vulnerability or a vulnerability vector. So a lot of computer viruses exploited this particular weakness in this Windows script host exe, and the security provisions and a lot of limitations have arisen, and they stopped this particular Windows script host. And then different versions of Windows after that, they started adding support for remote management like NetSH or Windows Management Instrumentation Control and so on. And all these effort came into better shape with a product called Monad. Okay, so Monad was a product that was introduced by Microsoft. They had this. It's like called as Microsoft Shell, or some people call it as MSH. Okay, so it had different names, but it's more of a command line management tool, and Microsoft developed this, and it was released as a manifesto, or it was released as a Monad manifesto by one of the chief architect in Microsoft with name Jeffrey Snower. He is the person who started all this effort and released it. Okay, Jeffrey Snower is there. You can also call him as the author of PowerShell as well, the Windows PowerShell. Okay, nowadays things have changed. Many authors have come and they have made a lot of core architectural changes when it was introduced as PowerShell core, or currently the Microsoft PowerShell. Things have changed, and a lot of enhancements, features have been added along the line. And when it was initially introduced as Monad and even Windows PowerShell, Jeffrey Snower is considered as the author or the primary contributor for the product. Okay, so now when Microsoft first demonstrated Monad publicly, I think they publicly showcased it in a professional development conference in Los Angeles in the year October 2003. Okay, in October 2003, Microsoft demonstrated that the Monad manifesto had a lot of capabilities of automating things, automating a lot of administrative tasks. We can reduce a lot of toil, we can reduce a lot of manual work. And a few months later, after 2003, they released it as a kind of private beta product, not to everyone. Microsoft published the first Monad public beta released way after this particular conference. So they had this conference in October 2003, right? So after that, I think the Monad first private release or rather public release, public beta release of Monad product was very late actually. It was in somewhere in mid 2005. Okay, and immediately they had some more public beta release version 2, version 3, and they have been releasing many products until Jan 2006. Okay, so now is the release of Windows PowerShell. So Windows PowerShell replaced the Monad product branding, and Microsoft released it as a kind of a kind of part of your Microsoft operating system. Initially, it was available as a download for your Windows 2003 operating system and so on. But then the first release of Windows PowerShell, I can just go to the slide here and then try to pick up a slide and then showcase what are the different releases we have had in the recent past. Okay, just a second. Okay, if you look at here, so PowerShell version 1 was released in November 2006, which was a default part of your Windows 2008 operating system. And we had PowerShell 2 in Windows 7 and PowerShell 3 in Windows 8 and so on. And currently we have PowerShell 7. I'll come to that, but these are all Windows PowerShell version. Okay, so Windows released multiple versions of PowerShell. So from Windows PowerShell version 1 to version 5.1, these are all Microsoft Windows only PowerShell product. Okay, it was not available for any of the other operating system. So Microsoft had an idea that they want to use this PowerShell product to automate things on other operating systems also. So Microsoft came up with an idea. So until this time, Windows PowerShell was developed based on the .NET framework, the GUI based full-blown .NET framework. And then it was written in C#, but then the actual framework, the backend was written on .NET framework, or they call it as .NET CLR. CLR stands for Common Language Runtime. So this Common Language Runtime was used for the product creation of PowerShell. Okay, so it was initially released in November 2006, the version 1, and then we had multiple versions until 2016. So in 2016, Microsoft took a different decision, and they started releasing product based on .NET Core. .NET Core is not the GUI, right? It's the kind of command line equivalent of .NET framework, and PowerShell Core was allowed to be installed in different flavors of operating system. So it became a cross-platform product. Okay, so it was a cross-platform product, and it can run on non-Windows platform also. So it had a lot of advantages, and then it was an open source kind of thing, and they called it as PowerShell Core, and we had multiple versions. Okay, PowerShell version 6.0, 6.1, I think even 6.2 was there, but I think from 2016 to 2019 we had 3 different releases. Okay, so when all these happened, PowerShell Core was not considered as a replacement for Windows PowerShell. The reason was a lot of commandlets has got reduced. I'll have a separate session on the comparison between these products. I'll compare and provide you at least 10 to 15 different points. But now I'm just covering the high-level history of PowerShell. So PowerShell Core was not intended to be a replacement of Windows PowerShell. At that time, during the 2016 to 2019 time, Microsoft thought of having 2 different products, one for Windows and another one which can be installed on cross-platform, and it was kind of going on. But PowerShell core had very limited commandlets because it was intended only to be doing things which can be done on the CLI level. So there it had very less commandlets compared to the Microsoft native PowerShell. If you ask me whether Windows PowerShell has got more versions after 5.1, no. Microsoft stopped releasing more product versions with Microsoft Windows PowerShell branding. So Windows PowerShell is no more getting new products or new versions. So that was the last version, Windows 5.1. Windows PowerShell 5.1 was the last version, after which Microsoft had 3 different versions on PowerShell core. Now, Microsoft has completely rebranded it to Microsoft PowerShell. Instead of Windows PowerShell, if you see just PowerShell, it means it is the latest cross-platform tool. And when PowerShell 7 was released, it was released based on .NET Core 3.0. Okay. The beauty of PowerShell 7 or maybe 7.3, it is latest built on .NET Framework 7. Okay, so .NET 7 is the backend of 7.3, and 7.3 was recently released 10 days back in this August month 2022. It was released, I think, exactly 12 days or 10-15 days back. It was released very recently, the 7.3 version. And the beauty of PowerShell 7 is actually it's open source. So you can take the code, and this code, the backend code is available in GitHub. You can go and get that spin up on any environment or any operating system. Okay, it supports Microsoft Windows, it supports Linux, it supports MacBook, it supports Mac operating system, it supports any Unix flavor of operating system also. So you have direct line, you can go and get that install. It's a full Windows management tool. It had almost all the commandlets that we used to have in Windows PowerShell 5.1. So PowerShell, the latest versions, can be considered as a replacement for your Microsoft Windows PowerShell versions. Okay, but not the PowerShell core. PowerShell core had a lot of limitations, and it did not have a lot of desktop version of supports and so on. So it did not have all the required thing to replace your PowerShell. Okay, so PowerShell 7 is the latest version, and you got many different releases. I can just show you something here. So it had 7.0, 7.1, and 7.3 is already released. It's not in preview anymore. It's already available in public in this month. So it was released a few days back. So if you look at the operating systems, so Windows Server 2022, 2019, 2016, you can go and install the latest version. Always, it's the best practice to go and install the latest version of PowerShell so that you enjoy the latest benefits and features and enhancements. Okay, so with that said, just a quick summary that I'll just show using a slide here. So starting with Windows PowerShell version 1.1, which was released in 2006. Microsoft had this PowerShell as a closed source until 2016, until version 5.1. And after 5.1, Microsoft had a new version called PowerShell Core, which was released in 2016 as an open source and as a cross-platform tool, which was developed based on .NET Core. So after the core version was released, the usage of PowerShell has got drastically increased, and it has been on a positive inclination. Now users have been adding, the developers have started utilizing it, and the non-Windows users also started using it. And now you can see there is a tough fight between the bash shell usage, the command, and then the PowerShell. Initially, you can see that there was not much usage when it was a closed source product, and it was just considered as a task automation tool. Now it is way beyond a task automation tool. You can go and install PowerShell on any version. Even if you think about PowerShell 7.0 or 7.3, you can go and install it on Windows Server Core. You can install it on Nano Server. You can install it on client operating system. It can be installed on any server operating systems, not just Windows. Okay, so PowerShell has become very powerful now. It is a cross-platform tool with the latest version 7.3. and its usage has increased. Not just administrators. Initially, when it was called it as Windows PowerShell, it was more of a tool for administrators to go and do automation. Now, a lot of people have started using developers, non-Windows users. Everyone have started enjoying the benefits of PowerShell, and it has completely overcome the shortcomings of DOS-based command line.exe or DOS-based .CLI. So it did not have a lot of advantages of managing complex scripts, but now the Windows PowerShell and the Microsoft PowerShell, which is based on the .NET Microsoft framework, now it can do a lot of magics and a lot of scripting and a lot of advanced stuffs are supported. But you don't need to be knowing about .NET. Okay, so as an administrator, you doesn't need to know about .NET or any of the backend WMI or low-level API coding. So that is more of a focus for the development team within Microsoft. And what you need to understand is you need to understand and focus on the commandlets. And then use it for automating things and improving the way that we have it. Okay, so PowerShell started with a brand name as Windows PowerShell. Now they have removed the branding as Windows PowerShell, just like Windows Azure. Okay, initially Azure was released as Windows Azure. Now it is just called Microsoft Azure. Similarly, when you always look at name PowerShell, it refers to the latest release. So there was the latest release of PowerShell, which is 7.2.6, I guess. That was recently released in August 2022. This is for public stable release. Okay, so there are three different releases. They call it as long-term release, stable release, and preview release. So I'll explain about these three release versions difference. But now there is a stable release which you can use for your production environment, 7.2.6. But you can also use a preview release which is 7.3. Not in your production environment, but in your non-production environment. They released it on 11th of August. Okay, just a couple of weeks back. Okay, so now you have 7.2.6, which you can install in your production environment and start utilizing the latest features. And 7.3 can be previewed and you can work on it. So in my next section, I'll explain the most enjoyable features that I liked in the versions version 2, 3, and 6 and 7 and so on. So I'll come up with maybe 5 to 7 different beautiful benefits on each of the versions. So there has been a lot of enhancement. There has been a lot of features that has been added to the each of the version that was released. So I'll create a separate recording for that, and you can keep watching it and enjoying it. So in this session, this is the overall history. So PowerShell journey started as a product name called Monad. And then I think I just missed one small line item here. There was one more product which was called Kermit. Okay, that was more of a corn shell equivalent. So I'm not sure how many of you have heard about the corn shell. It was very popular in the late 90s, 1997 or 1990s. It was late 90s. This is a kind of Linux equivalent corn shell. In Linux, we used to have something called K shell or corn shell. So Intel was pretty much funding this, or they have been allowing this to run on Sun Microsystem. I mean, Sun used to have a product called Solaris. It's a Unix version of Sun Microsystem product. It runs on RISC architecture CPUs. So even we had some product called Kermit. It was allowed to be installed on Microsoft Windows, but then it also had a lot of limitations and it had a lot of challenges. So Microsoft decided, or especially Microsoft Program Manager with name Jeffrey Schnower, he want to have a product that is more of a general purpose solution to Microsoft's operating system, and they want to automate the administrative task that is more on the Windows operating system side. That is the birth of Monad product, or the PowerShell product. So we also had something called Kermit, but it was not very popular. It was very brief time that it was evaluated, but then Microsoft considered that as the redundant product for corn shell, and they don't want to have something in Windows that is very equivalent to corn shell. They want to have something more aligned to Microsoft operating system, and they want to reduce the toil on the Microsoft administrative stuff. Okay, so we had different tools in the last 20 years or 25 years, and now we have a very stable product called PowerShell, which is an open source and it's a cross-platform tool. So thank you for listening. We'll catch up with the upcoming videos on PowerShell features, PowerShell core concepts, and so on.